Well, hey, welcome to the Steel Guitar Arts Council. I am thrilled and honored that I get to interview one of the founders, along with Whit Wright, of the Steel Guitar Arts Council, my old friend Russ Pahl, who I think I've known you now for 45 years.
Yes, at least, yeah, it's about that much.
How did this happen?
Zoom goes the time.
Yeah, well, Russ, I just be the old interviewer thing, but I mean, it's important to know Russ has done so much in his career as a musician, but I mean, his list of credits has blew me away today, even though I knew some of them. But I'm just going to read a few real quick, and then we'll start getting down to the nuts and bolts of the interview. But, you know, Alison Krauss, Robert Plant, Luke Bryant, Casey Musgraves, Lana Del Rey, Brothers Osborne, Blake Shelton, Kenny Rogers, Sierra Farrell, Jason Aldean, Sturgill Simpson, Ashley McBride, Carrie Underwood, Nathaniel Radcliffe, Patty Loveless, Nora Jones, Elton John, Tyler Childress, Leon Russell, Sarah Watkins from Nickel Creek, The Pretenders, Don Williams, Kings of Leon, Gretchen Wilson, Patty Griffin, Ian Tyson, Brooks and Dunn, Eric Church, Miranda Lambert. Those are just a few. I couldn't write it all down, you know. There's so many, and forgive me if I'm leaving some out, but man, you've had a pretty cool run of playing with people.
Apparently so. That's a pretty interesting list there.
You're just working for a living.
I was just working for a living, yeah.
Well, how did this all start, man? Where'd you grow up?
I am from the suburban west of Minneapolis, Minnesota. I grew up out there and had two older sisters that were into folk music back in the early 60s. So there was a guitar laying around, cheap Silvertone guitar, and I started banging away on that.
When was this, mid-60s?
Early 60s.
Had you seen the Beatles yet?
No, I actually was playing guitar for a few months before the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, and it had such an impact on me because here was these guys playing guitars and singing and, you know, just being the Beatles, and I just wanted to do that, and that was pretty much set the hook for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think all of us from that generation can pretty much say that. So you played guitar. When did you start playing in bands?
Oh, probably about fifth or sixth grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was always playing with kids that were older than me. My sister knew some friends that were in high school, and I was just starting junior high, and she said, my kid brother plays guitar, and they kind of laughed, and then I went to the rehearsal, and I ended up being in the band.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, then you had a great story that you've told me, and I think everybody needs to know. So, how did the steel guitar suddenly get into the mix?
Well, I was playing with a country band when I was probably about 13 or 14, somewhere in there, and we played at this ballroom on Sunday nights where we'd open for the Nashville bands that came through.
Right.
Tammy Wynette, George Jones, Hank Jr. back before the accident, and one night Wynn Stewart was playing there, and we'd play our little opening set, and we got done with the set, and this guy comes over to me and says, "Kid, you're playing the wrong instrument." And I was kind of like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you got that big old Gretsch guitar and them rubbery strings, and you're bending them all over the place." He said, "This thing over here will do all that for you."
Wow.
So I said, "Would you show me?" I didn't know what he was talking about. So he said, "Yeah, hang around. After we get done tonight, I'll show you." So afterwards he sat me down and showed me how to play the basic, you know, hit the two pedals, do the 1 to 4 change. Well, it turned out that was Ralph Mooney.
You're kidding.
So I don't know. It was sort of the hand of God came down and said, "Kid, you're going to play this instrument." And I found one at a pawn shop the next day, homemade one, and bought it. And that was like Monday, and Friday night I was playing it with the band. I mean, it was probably pretty primitive, but I took right to it. It didn't befuddle me at all. Right away. My dad is a machinist.
Right.
So I'm mechanical, and he and I worked on it together, because it was constantly under there trying to fix it and stuff.
So how long did you play that particular homemade steel?
Oh, probably a year and a half. He got stolen.
And so then what? Did you get a pro
I got
model?
I ended up getting a old Fender 1000.
Okay.
Double neck Fender, and played that for a while. And then I met a guy in northern Minnesota named Elvin Erickson, who built nice pedal steels.
I remember those.
And he built me a really nice one, and I played that. And then I met a guy named Clem Schmidt later on in Minneapolis, and he got me to playing Emmons guitars.
Yeah, Clem was renowned as an Emmons mechanic.
Yes.
And there's actually a bunch of really good steel players who came from.
Well, there's a whole thing. I think it's interesting. Detroit, that's where Paul Franklin's from. Minneapolis. These are all big industrial Midwest cities, and there was a lot of working class peoples. So there was a lot of country music in the bars. So there was a lot of employment in the 60s and 70s. So people went there, good musicians went to those cities to work because there was money there.
You could work 7 nights a week.
Yes. So there was actually a country music scene, and there was this sort of steel guitar world up there because there was all these machinists that worked in these factories, Honeywell and places like that were interested in steel guitars. So there was guys building steel guitars. There was a culture up there. It wasn't quite the same as like in Nashville, which is kind of still the center of that steel guitar activity. But there was a steel guitar culture there.
It was the Flame Club in Minneapolis?
Yes, Flame was Club. I was a little young to do much there, but everybody came through Minneapolis, and that's how we ended up playing at the ballroom where I met Ralph Mooney, was because they'd play there all week and then go up on Sunday nights to play at this ballroom. So
incredible.
Everybody played at the Flame.
And Hal Rugg came out of the Flame Club, right?
Yep. Hal Rugg, I think, married a woman from Minneapolis. He ended up, going to Minneapolis because he could make a living up there. And then he came back to Nashville.
Right. Yeah, that was a pretty great place. Well, you went through high school and you played around there, and when I met you, I don't know, probably 78 or 79, probably before I started with Ricky.
Yep.
And you came down here, and then you disappeared. What was that all about?
Oh, I came down to Nashville, just thought, I'll go check it out. This is about, I think, 78, and first night, I came to town, I walked into this, somebody said, well, there's a steel player at this club. So I went to this club on Murfreesboro Road called the VIP Lounge.
Oh, yeah.
And I went in, and Bobby Seymour was playing with the band in there. And I came up and said, I play steel guitar. He said, well, do you want to sit in? And so I brought in my steel and played a set. And afterwards he said, well, do you want the gig?
Wow.
He said, I got something else I got to go do. So I walked right into a 6-night-a-week gig. So for about 4 months, that's all I did. But I didn't really get out into the other parts of the world. But I met you while I was there. I rented a little apartment on 16th Avenue. And then I went back to Minneapolis for a few years.
I remember and we'll get to some of this stuff later on, but I mean, there was a little, precursor to what you became as an innovator. But I remember one thing where I don't know if you came over to my house or where, but you said, "Man, look, I can make my steel sound like a piano here, like Floyd Kramer." And you did this thing with where you muted the steel and did it with your thumb, like
you play 2 strings, and then a half tone apart, and then you play both of them, and then you, with your thumb on your left hand, you mute one of the strings, so it does kind of like Floyd Kramer, da 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 da, without the pedal move.
And I thought that was the coolest thing, and at the same time, I thought, well, I don't know about that. I'm gonna, we were, doing things, but then you left town. Did you have a job out back in Minneapolis?
No, I just went back to Minneapolis and played in clubs. Actually, those were my lost years. There was about 3 or 4 years where I just I was a freewheeling bachelor. I was playing. I was kind of the top dog steel player up there, and was probably drinking and drugging way too much. I mean, I had no compass whatsoever, and after about 3 or 4 years of that, I decided I need to go back to Nashville, and this time I need to go get serious. So I think that was in about '84.
Yeah, I know you came back to town, and what did you start? Did you start working in clubs, or did you take a tour, or did you?
I came to town and started hanging around at Gabe's and the Rose Room. These little clubs were, and I got to know all these people that were like in the back then. Every act on the Opry had their own band,
right? And
they'd play the Opry, and then they might go out and do some tours. So there was a whole group of people: Pete Finney and Tommy Hannum. You were an Elevated. You were actually a big star by then. But you were still hanging around with a bunch of that crew, and so I played clubs, and then through a friend I hooked up with Dickie Betts.
Yeah.
And played on a demo for him, and then he said, "Well, do you want to come out and play some gigs?" So for about a year, I went out and played with Dickie Betts.
Now, was Danny Parks in the band with you, or was that afterwards?
He was in it before me,
okay.
But he's the guy who hooked me up with it.
Yeah.
He was, I think, out with Mel Tillis or somebody.
Right. Do you remember what year the Dickie Betts things was?
That was like '85.
Yeah, I remember how cool I thought that was. I was like, wow.
Oh, we had all the harmonies worked out. With John Yudkin was playing fiddle, and Johnny Neal was playing keyboards. And we had everything. We did a lot of those Allman Brothers songs, and we had all the harmonies. It was really cool.
And you were doing all the harmonies on
steel.
pedal steel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you were playing an Emmons then, right?
Yeah, playing Emmons. I had one of the last push-pulls made because this Clem Schmidt was a dealer in Nashville, and so I ordered a brand new double neck Emmons back in, I think, '81.
Yeah.
Which I still have. Great guitar. Yeah.
Had you started bastardizing the guitars yet, or were you?
I hadn't got that point yet, but I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, because as we all know, you have created almost a new instrument, even though it's a pedal steel. But I didn't know back then if you had.
I think it was in the back of my mind, but I don't know if I had the courage yet. Maybe I didn't have a workshop at the time or something.
So just since we are talking to steel players, '85. What were you with Dickie Betts? What were you using for effects?
Back then, I really wasn't using much for effects. I was playing pretty much straight ahead.
Even when you were doing all those, well, I guess Dwayne and Rick and Dickie were fairly clean, but
the clean steel sound worked really good, especially with the fiddle,
right?
And then Dickie, it was loud. I think I probably had a Nashville 400 or something, and when you play them really loud, there's a compression that kicks in.
It kicks in,
and we were loud enough where it kind of smoothed things out.
Right. Yeah, I played those amps. We all played those amps.
Oh yeah.
And Peavey was the amp company that was trying. I guess Buddy Emmons had kind of worked with them on R&D to try to get it. So Peavey amps and Emmons guitars seemed to be voiced really well.
Yep. And they were loud and they were bulletproof.
Yeah, and you could just put the pedal all the way down and they just bang. Yeah, that was pretty cool. So you after you got through with Dickie, you came back to town.
Yep.
And just started playing?
Just started playing. I toured then with Nicolette Larson.
I forgot about that, yeah.
Played with her, played on a record with her. That was the first time I met Tony Brown, and Emery Gordy produced a record on MCA, and they brought me into overdub on a couple songs. And that was pretty eye-opening. That was probably my first major session.
And great producers, both of them.
Yes.
Both incredible musicians. Were there any, was it pretty flawless session, or did you?
Oh, I was scared shitless.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Oh no,
but,
that's what happens.
No, I think I actually play. I should go dig that up. I think I actually played a solo on one of the songs, and already people said, "Well, you sure play different than other steel players." I always thought I was just trying really hard to sound like a steel player, and everybody else said, "Well, you sound real different." So.
Well, that's an interesting point because I think we have a tendency as Nashville steel players, at least I know I did, and I know a lot of my friends did. We all came to Nashville and we had all these iconic steel players, and we all wanted to sound like them.
Right.
And I mean, you weren't ever really that guy.
Well, and I think we talked earlier about this. You asked me how many solos I've ever learned note for note, and I said probably a half a dozen halfway through because my attention span would always stop me. I'm just lazy, and I would always branch off and start doing something different. So
Sure.
That's just my natural. That's the way I do things. I'm not very good at replicating other people's stuff.
Well, the other part of the equation, which I've noticed, and I know you've thought about it, but the steel players, the great steel players that started as guitar players,
Yeah.
I think that probably shaped, a lot of your thought process.
Oh yeah. Well, I really try to think sonically of the steel guitar more and more like an electric guitar. And digging it apart, actually rewiring, winding pickups and everything. My steel guitar is almost more of a guitar than a steel guitar in some ways, electronically.
Well, it's you said something to me years ago, but you said you thought the steel guitar was one of the best tone generators.
Oh yeah, great tone generating device. Yes.
Yeah, and it's that's done you well, but you came into the 90s. By the 90s, you were still, I guess, were you touring then, or were you?
I was touring. I played with Nicolette for a while. I played with Michael Johnson, who had a few country records. Brent Mayer was producing.
Minnesota boy, right?
Yes. And then out of that, then I got in with the Don Williams camp. And starting in about '89, I toured with Don for 3 years.
Wow.
And, that really taught me a lot about being in a really cool band that did play loud.
And who was in that band?
Dave Pomeroy.
He was still there?
He was still there. John Gardner was playing drums. And Billy Sanford was playing guitar. And Billy and I and Billy's a legendary guitar player. You listen to any country music recorded from about 1964 to 1984, and there's a really, really good chance Billy was playing guitar on it.
And what, kind of a rhetorical question, but what would you say one of Billy's great strengths was as a guitar player?
He's an idea guy. He could, I've talked, he and Lloyd Green did all the Little Darlin' records together. And that was a whole sound, and it was a very fertile, creative time. And Lloyd says Billy just was constantly coming up with cool ideas. Just hey, let's try this little part. And also, I think Billy, it just never seemed like he sat around and practiced stuff. He could just actualize. He could think of some kind of thing and then play it. I don't know, sort of magic, I think.
I always thought his playing, it was kind of, you didn't notice it until you did.
Yeah. Well, no, it was just, it fits so good, and it's so important in so many things.
And you play with a guy like Don, where it's about nothing but the song.
Right.
And the voice, so you learn to be economical.
You learn to be economical, you listen to the lyrics, you listen to the singing, and don't get in the way of that.
And then you had the paper, the Lloyd Green paper that came with the gig.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And boy, that taught me a lot about melody and economics and a big fat sound.
Well, you know, Lloyd, and I'm sure you've heard the same story, but Lloyd, those guys were hired by Alan Reynolds, and this was something that was new back in the era when Don started happening. I guess Alan want to create a sound for Don?
Oh yes, they made demos for a better part of a year, just getting together every few weeks and doing a session or two. And Lloyd says they just kept taking stuff out, removing, don't play so much, don't play so much. Finally, they got to one place. I think Lloyd said, "Well, should I just not play anything?" And Alan said, "Yeah, I think we're there now."
Right.
It was a subtractive process, and that's the Don Williams sound.
Well, we're in the mid '90s, and I'm kind of thinking where I was in the mid '90s. You know, I fell in with a couple good producers, and was working with Garth Brooks and stuff. So I had a couple of these things, but I'd remember I'd run into you, because you know what happens. The session business becomes a business of acquaintances, and then of course, when you're playing the same instrument, you all don't end up on the same session very often.
No.
You know.
Yeah.
So you're all, you know, looking around, everybody's doing different stuff, but I just remember people started talking about you. You know, they would just Russ Pahl, man, he was in here, he did some cool stuff. And that was one of the things that somebody said to me one time, Russ Pahl is not afraid to say, this doesn't need steel.
Yeah.
Let me put a 12-string part on it, or let me put a...
Well, I started out as a guitar player, and I still play guitar every day, because for one thing, you can lounge in a chair and play guitar, where steel guitar you have to sit up at it. It's a more formal situation. But I play guitar, so that means you can play a lot of different instruments, because I play like guitar. And I just think there's some things where steel's not a particularly rhythmic instrument, so there's sometimes when a song would need more of a rhythmic element, so maybe I'll go, well, let me pick up a guitar or this or that. Yeah. So luckily I was pretty well versed at guitar, so I could do that. Dan Dugmore is, in that kind of same camp. Justin does a lot of that. Justin Shipper.
Yeah, he started as a guitar player.
So, there's kind of that branch of the steel guitar family that are steel players that are also guitar players. I think Curly Chalkert was a really good guitar player.
Yeah.
I think even Weldon Myers was a really good guitar player.
Which I didn't know. I always wonder about Paul, I need to ask him if he ever played,
I don't know.
It'd be interesting to find out. He's a shredder back behind the scenes or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's some, incredible things that happened with you in the 90s that we need to talk about that maybe I missed, but you started towards the late 90s, you started really starting to show up.
Well, I had a
sort of breakthrough.
Well, maybe earlier on, but I started realizing it by then that there is no way that I can beat other people at this game. I mean, there was you making records, there was Paul making records, there was Sonny Garish making records. I realized that I could never outdo any of you at the way you did it. So I thought, I just need to really develop my whole angle. I had a natural tendency to play different than other people, but I thought, this time I'm going to design a whole different way of playing.
Well, I know I used to work, there used to be a really great little demo house, and I know you and I have talked about this. We were so lucky in the 90s because there was so much money in the music business that it was true trickle down, because basically everybody was buying records, so all these publishers were getting money and they could sign writers. So you and I were so lucky that we could work. If we weren't working on a record, if we weren't doing a live thing or whatever, we could work a demo session. We'd cut 5 songs. We'd have to cut 5 songs in 3 hours, and we'd have to learn how to, how to build tracks
Right.
and learn how to listen, because you didn't sit there. People think, well, how'd you come up with these arrangements? You all talk about this and write this out? No, you listened. If you heard the piano player coming in on the second verse, then you don't play in the second verse when the red light comes on. And and you get a thing. But I remember I used to work at this place called Malloy Boys, and I know you worked there a lot.
Yep.
And David Malloy was a legendary young producer in town, but Gary J. Smith ran this studio, and they were doing custom sessions all the time. And I'll never forget, David came up to me one time and he said, "Have you heard that thing Russ Pahl does?" And I said, "What?" And he says, "Man, he's doing this really cool delay thing." And I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I said, "Oh yeah, well, it's a fad." I didn't quite say that. I mean, I'm joking, but I mean, had I been smart, I sat there, I would have said, "Oh man," but I didn't choose to go that way, because I was still, I happened to fall into a place where you could play straight steel.
Right.
And if I wanted to rock out a little bit, I played lap steel, but I wasn't sitting there, and I put a little bit of delay on for ambience and stuff.
Right.
But you had learned how to, you mentioned earlier, steel's not a rhythm instrument. Well, you started figuring out how to make it a rhythm instrument.
Right.
And people started talking about it. Yeah. How?
Well, it's we call them gags when you have a trick, and the old Echoplex trick where you do the dotted thing. Now it's so much part of the modern music vocabulary, but back then it was still not that common, and I just sort of figured it out. This was before there was even tapping. You couldn't dial in a delay, and you couldn't tap it in. You just had to sit there and mess with the dial till it kind of fit the tempo of the song. But I started doing that, and I used to get my hands slapped a lot in the studio with just these kind of harebrained ideas. And some of them have panned out pretty well. Some I had to leave by the wayside. But the dotted delay thing, I sort of got scientific about it. I sort of figured out how to make it work. I mean, I used it yesterday on a session. I started out playing one thing, and the producer came out and said, "Man, can you do that rhythm thing you do?" And so it still has some teeth to it. But it's just it was something that had been around, but I took and sort of refined it.
Yeah, and you use two delays now.
Yeah, I have one that's the dotted delay, which is basically a photographic delay. There's no character to it. It's just a digital delay.
One
single.
One repeat.
One repeat, and then that feeds into a second. I've got a line 6, which has got a lo-fi delay. That goes off on straight 8 notes, and it sort of messes up the sound, deteriorates it. And I've got controls on my guitar, knobs right on my steel that are plugged into the back of the pedals in the expression control outlets. So I can control the intensity of the delays right from my guitar. And you can get very musical with it. It's almost like an infinite sustain, or it almost sounds like a synthesizer part. There's more than just doing the rhythmic thing. It's a way of expanding the space of the instrument.
Well, that you started with that rhythmic thing, and then you, there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of stuff to bring in, but I don't know when you did this, but you started tuning down a half step. When did you?
Yeah, maybe 15, 20 years ago, and I can't quite tell you why. It's just, I just say some of my favorite guitar players tuned down. Buck Owens tuned down a half step.
I had no idea.
If you listen to Buckaroo, it's in D flat.
Of course it is. But
Stevie Ray Vaughan, Eddie Van Halen,
right.
A lot of guys did it just sonically. I just started messing around with it one time, and so I started tuning to E flat, and I could use heavier strings.
Right.
And what it kind of ultimately did is even the playing field, because we grow up in club bands playing in the key of G and A and E and C, and somebody says E flat, and you're just going, oh God, what do I do? B flat, oh God, what do I do? That's for cornets, you know. And by changing to E flat, it's like suddenly all the old comfortable keys were now the uncomfortable
Right.
keys. So now I just don't even think about what key I'm in. You know, I write it on my chart what key it is, so I remember what it is, but I play by position. And there's no good keys and there's no bad keys. And it really kind of made the instrument to me just more universal, because I wasn't worried about keys, because they're all bad.
Well, you also took off the third pedal.
Yeah. I always heard, and I don't know if this is true, Ralph Mooney had a pedal over to the right where he could use with his right foot that would raise the E string a whole tone.
Right.
Just another whole tone change. Because the third pedal, always to me, I had trouble getting it tuned right. And
Well, you have to. The problem is, it's especially on an Emmons. That first pedal, you tune that fifth pedal.
yeah,
That's going to be where it is. That C sharp
Yeah.
that comes up, talking,
Yeah.
you know, steel talk here. The C sharp is there. That's where
Yeah.
it stops. But to turn that third pedal to get that F sharp where it really should be, which is not quite where the first string is,
Right,
but
right.
close to it, you can't bring the fifth string up
right.
on that guitar. Now you can do that on an all pull guitar.
Yeah.
But if you want to play a push pull and
Yeah.
you want to do all that kind of stuff, but it's you know, Sonny Garish and Scotty Sanders and you and a couple other people have that E to F sharp on an E lever.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so you're not trapped by.
Yeah, I just got rid of the third pedal, and now I'm used to it. You know, I raise both my E's a whole tone. Actually, they're E flats, but I just think,
Right.
of, you know, but so I raise them both. So I've also got new things down below on the low end of this. It's like having a third pedal that you can do the low E
Right.
string too.
And Paul raises his 8 string a whole tone.
Okay.
You know, and I've gone back and forth a couple times, but it's really nice to be able to have that whole voicing. You
Well,
know.
to me, the essence of pedal steel is that whole tone change that you
Right.
get with your first pedal. That's what the Bud Isaacs Slowly, everything, the birth of pedal steel was Bud Isaacs and Slowly. And that's that whole tone change. That's where all the expression is. And having that on a separate knee lever, that knee lever is as expressive to me as the A pedal is. Now, a lot of guys have the change where they raise the first string a whole
Sure.
tone. And once again, that's very expressive. That whole tone change, especially if you can milk it, that's where the money is. That's what people love to hear when they hear pedal steel.
Oh, I agree. I mean,
They don't want to hear half change. That's dull. They want that whole, and they want it milked. You know?
first steel solo you heard on a record that blew you away?
Someday Soon. Someday Soon is my benchmark. Buddy Emmons on Junie Collins record. I still, every time I sit down at a steel guitar, I try to play that damn intro and get that sound. It doesn't happen. I can't get it.
Did you ever get to meet Buddy Emmons?
I've met him. I actually traded a dobro. We traded dobros one time through Mike Cass. So I met him, but I was so starstruck that, you know.
He scared me to death.
Yeah. No, it's just.
And he wasn't that guy. I mean, he
Yeah.
was actually apparently gentle and insecure as the rest of us.
But I didn't know it at the time. No, but you know, I got to be around. I've seen him play a number of times live and everything. And you know, he and Lloyd, those about the same time was the Sweetheart of the Rodeo record,
Right.
and that whole thing. You know that
You ain't going nowhere.
you ain't going nowhere. 100 years from now, all that stuff. That's in my DNA. That's in my DNA.
Me too. I mean, for me, it was Buddy, Lloyd. I mean, I heard Lloyd before I started playing steel.
Right.
JD.
Yep.
And I got confused on the Sweethearts record as to who played what. But
Right.
as I've gotten to know both of those people as you have, you realize how much J.D. was influenced
Oh, absolutely.
by Lloyd.
Yeah.
But he lived on the West Coast, and he had that. He also had the West Coast thing of having been around, you know, Brumley and Mooney, which people
Yeah.
don't realize how much of an icon Mooney was in the late 50s
Yeah.
and early 60s. But and Lloyd, and I mean, you and I are both lucky enough to be friends with Lloyd,
Right.
you know, and
Right.
but you know, I mean, the experience of being over at his house and he'll pull out some record and play something, and you're going. For me, as a steel player, I'll hear that and I'll go, God, I'm not worthy of being on this planet.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling.
You
Yeah.
know, I mean, there's something there. Buddy and Lloyd, both of those guys, just getting a little esoteric here on steel stuff. Right hand, left hand. What's more important?
Oh, equal. It's the brain. The hands are just a tool. It's not even the brain, it's the soul. We are mentioned early, what was it? Your life is your tone.
Yeah.
That is I think it's something from your soul that you are aching to hear. And you're going to do whatever it takes with your hands and feet or your amp and your picks or whatever. You're going to do whatever you can to try to emulate that sound that you're hearing in your soul. And that's what tone is. And it's like a singing voice. And I can't say either one is more important.
Well, the only reason I brought that up
Okay.
is, to me, Buddy and Russ are the Bible.
Buddy and Lloyd.
Buddy and Lloyd, I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Maybe 20 years from now, we'll be talking about you being part of the
No, Buddy and Lloyd, those are the first two heads on the Mount Rushmore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Lloyd was left-handed.
Yeah.
Buddy was right-handed.
Yep.
And if you look at Buddy's technique, you know, a lot of stuff Buddy would play would be here, and then he'd go here, and he'd go here, and he'd go, but all just gorgeous. And his right-hand technique
right.
and figuring it in all his C6, and of course, when he's playing all the
Yeah.
bebop. But when you watch Lloyd play a solo, you know, he's like snaking across the neck, all the way up the neck, and these, you know, second string, and just all that crazy stuff he did. Yeah. And it was never about, even though he played fast.
He can do that, yes.
But it was a different thing, and same with Buddy. I mean, but yeah, you're right, man. It's tone, it's life experiences. I mean,
yeah, I think all of that feeds into it. And I've had a lot of talks with Lloyd about, you know, where his inspiration comes in. And he doesn't talk about hearing somebody play something. He's talking about when he was a kid with his friends, going down to the swimming hole or out with some girl or something, that he always tells me that's the things that he would envision when he was playing music. That was his inspiration. So very unmechanical.
well, yeah, and I mean, I know we probably talked about this when you interviewed me, and I've always told the story, but that's what Lloyd always told me. He said, when I told him I wanted to be a session player, he said, listen to the words, and this is something that a great song, a great lyric will inspire you if you pay attention.
Yes.
It will tell you where to go.
Oh, absolutely. I think when you're making records, and I've learned this from two people that were my biggest inspiration as far as being a session player in this respect, is Billy Sanford, my father-in-law, and Don Potter, who played guitar, like on all the Judd's records and everything, acoustic guitar. Because Don co-produced a record when I had my band Great Plains. So I spent a lot of time in the studio. But what those two guys, without them ever telling me this, is that when you listen to a song, a well-written song. There's a lot of songs that aren't well-written. They're just sort of, it's like a run-on sentence. It sounds like a song, but a well-written song has information embedded in it. And if you just open your mind and you really listen, it'll tell you exactly what needs to be there.
Or what doesn't need to be there.
Yes. And it's generally the most elegant things are the simplest things.
Yeah.
It's a whimper. It's a, that's what's great about the steel guitar is you can imitate. I don't play a lot of licks. I do a lot of things that I call just whimpers and little cries, just little things that are. It's not really a sound effect, but it's an emotional. It's like somebody sighing, and that's where the steel guitar is so expressive as a tone generator.
Well, you ended up working with some like really unique producers, and to me, these are guys that have all made iconic music that spans genres. Mm-hmm. Let's just talk about a couple of them just real quick. Buddy Miller.
Buddy Miller is one of those guys that he's so sort of humble and aw shucks, and I don't know about that fancy chord there and everything, but in reality, he knows exactly about everything you're doing, and he always gave me pretty free rein. I don't think he's ever told me what to do or not to do.
I think he's one of the best country singers there ever was.
Yes,
and he's from New Jersey or something, or New York or something like that.
Yeah, he was at Woodstock, because I think it was in his neighborhood or something.
Yeah. So Buddy Miller was great. I know you worked with him a lot.
Yes.
And was he the? Did you work with him on the Nashville TV show, or did you start working when?
I've been with I worked with Buddy long before the Nashville stuff, but I did.
I knew that.
I did. I'm one of the few people I think that was kind of there for the whole. There was like 3 different producers. There wasn't a lot of steel guitar in the Nashville show, which always kind of befuddled me because I think that's kind of the Nashville instrument. But generally, if there was steel guitar, it was probably me.
And that brings another producer, T-Bone Burnett.
Yes, T-Bone.
How'd you meet T-Bone?
Between Buddy Miller and Dennis Crouch, the bass player, who they were working on the second Raising Sand record. After the first Raising Sand, they were working on a second Alison Krauss, Robert Plant record. And both Buddy and Dennis were going, we've been talking to T-Bone. He needs, he needs you. And finally one night about 10 o'clock at night, my phone rings and it's Buddy. And he says, get over to Sound Emporium right now. So I was, I probably lived 15, 20 minutes from there. So I packed up my guitar and I went over to Sound Emporium, and walking into the room, and here's the whole Sound Emporium A, which is a big studio, and here's all these important players. And they're right in the middle of working on a Merle Haggard song. And, it's just like, this is pretty intimidating. And so they kind of stop everything for me as I walk in, set up my guitar and amp, and I'm setting it up, making sure it's working. And then this big, tall, blonde guy walks up to me and says, I'm T-Bone. And he looks at me and says, I don't like steel guitar licks. And that's the only thing he's ever said to me about the steel guitar. We've been working, on and off ever since.
And what year was this? Do you remember?
2010 or 11, somewhere in the beginning of the teens, I think.
So, T-Bone led you to some pretty cool places.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Did you would go out to California?
Go to California to work quite a bit. Ended up they were doing a Elton John, Leon Russell record where they were cutting it all. Out in California. I hear all this from Dennis, Dennis Crouch, because he played on all that stuff. And actually, T-Bone sent a track to me in Nashville to overdub on that. And so I played on that. And then we ended up doing a tour with Leon and Elton. So I got to play with Elton. And then one night we were backstage, I think like the Beacon Theater, and Elton always had 6 local SWAT team guys, whatever city he had this sort of bodyguard patrol. And here's all these big guys, and they're all kind of walking over and towards me, and all of a sudden there's Elton, and he says, "Russ, we're taping a documentary in a couple weeks, and I'd really love you to come to Los Angeles and play with my own band for a couple nights. Do you think you could do that?" I said, "I think I can arrange it." So we had a special band for this Elton Leon tour, but then I actually got to play with Elton's band for a couple.
Davy Johnson.
David, yeah, and Dee Murray and everybody. Not Dee.
No, Dee had
No,
passed.
Dee had already
Dee had
passed. But Nigel Olsen.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just to stay on Elton for a little while, Elton had steel on his first record.
Oh yeah.
And he had 2 people. He had B.J. Cole, but he also had Gordon Hunley.
Yep.
Who I think Gordon Hunley played on Country Comfort.
Yep.
And Gordon was a beautiful player. He ended up playing with Matthews Southern Comfort
Yes,
too. He did
yeah.
Matthews Southern
Woodstock.
Comfort, Woodstock on that record and stuff. And
Yeah.
I got to meet him, but Elton always loved that instrument.
Well, the second day of rehearsal with Elton, you're always like, how am I doing with this? And the monitor guy comes over to me and says, "Something you need to know." And I'm thinking, oh no, this is bad news. He said, "Right now, next to Elton, you're the loudest thing in his monitor, and he really likes the way you're negotiating the chord changes, because there's a lot of the songs there was no steel on, but I play, I look for places where I think steel would fit." And he said, "Elton really likes the things you're putting in there." So, it was much more than copying the steel from the records, because the steel was not on all the records.
Right.
But and that's one of the things I've developed an instinct for, is to look for I call them pivot points, and that's where you push the A and B pedal, the A to B. That's what the pedal steel to me is all about. And anywhere you can use those in a chord change that is a pivotal point, there's horsepower in that. And that just sort of reaffirmed me on that. So that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's kind of a Zen thing, and I'm sure you've had those conversations with people. But Rob Pajakis and I used to sit there in the parking lot after sessions and talk about, at what point do you need to, as a steel player, lift the song, and where do you hand off to the next instrument?
Yeah.
Where do you sonically go?
Right.
And where do you fade in? And it's all that nuance, which I think it's really important for whatever's left in the session business, or whatever, or just in general, to be a successful musician, is to learn.
Well, it's much more than playing licks. Licks are great. Licks are tools. It's more about the emotion.
Yeah. Well, but some of the couple other big producers, Fergie.
Fergie. Fergie's become a very good friend. We've done a bunch of stuff. We did a lot of stuff together with Dan Arbach, and we've done stuff where he and Sturgill.
Yes, Sturgill
Simpson, and
did he work on Tyler Childers, or was that?
Yep. We did like his first 2 records, and I still don't think I realized just how big those records are. Eddie Dunlap was saying something. "Man, you played something on this song," and he said, "Don't you know that?" And I said, I don't know if I've ever listened to it. So actually, the other night I listened to a few Tyler Childers songs, and it's a pretty cool record.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are all, they're fringe artists that are huge. They're bigger than the majority of the Nashville artists that Nashville keeps trying to cram down the collective throats. Guys like Sturgill Simpson and Tyler, they're selling out arenas.
Yes.
And they don't get played on the radio.
Right.
But it's music. And they're reaching something. Yeah, Fergie, I met Fergie when he was a young engineer who worked for Jack Clement.
Right,
and
right.
and you know, and Fergie's paid attention all these years, and he's getting his due
Oh,
for
yeah.
all those
He makes
this
good
hard work.
records.
Makes great sounding records. We've talked about T-Bone. T-Bone loves you to death, and you've been able to play on so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
But Dan Auerbach, Black
Dan Auerbach,
Keys.
yeah. Done a lot of stuff. Dozens of records with Dan. All kinds of things. Lana Del Rey, which is not exactly country music, you know. Ray LaMontagne. We did a CeeLo Green record that never came out, but really
played on
cool
Yola's record, right?
Yeah, played a couple of Yola's records and stuff.
But you didn't necessarily play steel on these records. On all of them.
A lot of times, most of the time with Dan, I was a track mule playing some kind of rhythm guitar, acoustic or electric, and a lot of times steel would be something we'd overdub later.
Well, you also, it became a situation where Dan kind of really looked to you for casting advice and arrangement advice, and didn't you guys write a bunch of songs together?
We did a fair bit of writing. I'm not really that much of a professional writer, so we did probably more than I deserved, you know. But I did a lot of help on the floor arranging songs, just like things like, well, maybe we need to only do half a bar there, just little arrangement things. Yeah. And those are things, all those arrangement ideas I learned back when we all worked at County Q back in the 90s, where we did 15 demo sessions a week, you know, where you're just cranking through songs, but you're arranging as you go.
You know, I'm sure you had a couple times where you spent all day at County Q.
Oh, yeah.
With 3 different writers.
Yep.
15 to 20 songs in 3 sessions.
Yep.
And what we all had to learn there was arranging. I know we're backtracking a little bit, but I mean, you look at some of the guys that, well, I know you and I mean, it was just an amazing training ground for us. Right. But you know, you remember when young JT Cornfloss started working at County Q?
Yeah. Oh, he practically lived there. I think he had a cot in the back room.
And he did something, and I think this is important, because you and I can look back at all the amazing players we've met, and without naming names, there's guys that play circles around me, play circles around everybody, who could never adapt in the studio.
Right.
And part of it was you had guys like you who, what can I add? How can I enhance this thing? But you had JT, and God bless him, man. I mean, this guy was the most amazing human being, and he died, he passed, you know, a few years ago, but he would be in a session, and we'd be rushing. It'd be 15 minutes, 10 minutes left in the session. The writer's freaking out over this song. It might not even be a good song, but this is the most important song in the world.
Yeah.
And you know, well, we still got to get us. And JT say, no, don't worry, I'll stay. I'll stay over and do my solo. And that's that whole thing about. And I handled it okay through my career, but I've done plenty of therapy on how I could have done better, because you know, I drank a lot. I used to drink a lot, but it's a service industry.
Yes.
And how does that, the psychology, I mean, how many days did you leave a session where you went, oh my God, I didn't play anything worth a shit?
Well, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages. Basically, we get hired for a 3-hour time slot.
Right.
And basically, no matter what the situation is, you go in and you're at their service for 3 hours.
Right.
And sometimes they just shut up and play some steel licks. Fine. Sometimes they're going, I need some ideas here. I need a turnaround or something. I need this or that. So you are definitely a service industry, and you've got to you just got to kind of size up the, as Paul Franklin would say, you've got to learn to read the room.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, I think the most important part is, and it seems to be a lot with guitar players and steel players. Everybody gets all caught up on playing all this fast, fancy licks and this and that. I'd say spend more time learning music, and not just note music, but listen to songs and listen to great records and listen to how one thing moves to another thing. Listen to where the emotional points are. Listen to where those pivot points. And, try to, and you'll see patterns. It's all patterns. It's, music can be broken down into math if you let it. I'm not very mathematical about it. I feel it more. But it can be broke down into numbers. It's digital. It's absolutely digital. But if you can start to recognize the patterns in a song and where you need to pivot, or where you need to disappear, or where you need to express something, where you need to cry, where you need to be happy. It's just, that's the most important stuff. All the licks and all the gear in the world don't get you that.
So, how is it that a simple Pete Drake lick that he played back in the 60s still gets people?
Well, I would bet that a big part of that Pete Drake lick is that first pedal, that whole tone change. That's what steel guitar is to me. And Pete, we have got Buddy and Lloyd. We got Weldon, we got Hal, we got Tom Brumley, we got Curly Chalker, we got all these guys, John Huey, Paul Franklin, and everything. Pete Drake is probably the father of commercial steel guitar, and I think he just knew how to play emotions. And I think we all kind of go, "Oh, Pete really didn't play very well." Actually, he was a much more sophisticated player than any of us that he'd ever let on.
That didn't hit me until recently.
Yeah. Now, he's a very sophisticated player. And and like I say, my father-in-law, Billy Sanford, was in the trenches with Pete for years and saw him at work. And just, Pete was the guy who could play with feeling. He had ideas, but he didn't rely on licks, or he didn't rely on technique. He relied on emotion.
Right. I mean, you look at the circle, that's around it. And I mean, I know as I get older, emotion is even more important, because I mean, back when I started, it was like, I was lucky, I had the Skaggs gig, so that was a lick gig, and I got to play licks, but it was harder for me to just sit there and play passion, and man, you look around, it's like guys like Steve Hinson, who arguably, he's our friend. I mean, we look at this whole circle. We've got Scotty Sanders, Paul, me. I mean, just everybody that our generation.
Mike Johnson.
It's all still playing. And there's an emotional component to all these guys that keeps this longevity.
Yeah. Yep. That's where the rubber meets the road with the instrument. It can be a very technical instrument, but what people really love, I can tell a lot what my wife listens to. She'll say, "I love that," and it's always something that's emotional.
It's simple.
Yeah,
so many times.
Yeah.
And same with guitar players. I mean, we think of that. You're doing so many things. I mean, this is, you make great guitars. I actually happen to have a Tele of yours, which is one of my favorite guitars just to play. It plays great. You're not necessarily inventing the wheel. You just know how to build a guitar that feels right.
I've been around it long enough I know when it's right or not right.
Right.
And I have the patience to sit and tweak on it till it is.
And this I think this is legacy from your dad, the way you grew up. And then you're, people don't know that you learned industrial sewing, right? You know.
Well, yeah, I mess around with sewing machines. I like machines. I like things that wrap around bobbins. It's interesting. I like
Well,
the
you
wine
might-
pickups. I like to thread, sewing machines. So,
You know, you've cannibalized different steels and created these different
yeah,
instruments.
well, I've
for-
ruined a lot of good steels. Let's be honest. But no, I can't. I'm restless that way. I like to keep tweaking on stuff.
Well, that's good. I mean, because it's just, I regret the fact that I don't know how to do any of that.
Well, I want to take a moment and mention Jeff Surratt, which we haven't got around to, because that's the guitar I end up playing. That's my workhorse.
The Show Pro.
The Show Pro, I have several of them, and he's been really good at kind of building a custom instrument for me that then, I can take and do what I need to do with it.
And that instrument has become, I would argue, almost a unique instrument because you've got a lot of young steel players, apparently. A lot of young steel players are buying this instrument, because they know they're technically savvy. Here we got this little switch. We can put an overdrive up here and sort of dial in instead of having to, and we can control our delays or whatever whatever we decide to control. That's pretty cool. That's
yeah. Well, it's just, once again, it's okay to think out of the box when you can, and we've been handed a lot of tradition. I feel that pedal steel guitar has been sort of stifled compared to like electric guitar. Electric guitar is just completely, it's just evolved over the last 70 years. Steel guitar evolved really heavily until maybe the mid 70s.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of, everybody goes back, well, let's go listen to what they did. I think if more people would get more adventurous, maybe there'd be more of us.
Well, there's a few guys. I mean, Robert Randolph came from the
yep.
whole Sacred Steel, and he's become a star, and he's a great musician, and a great guy. But we talked about it earlier. The worst thing about the steel guitar is it's an expensive endeavor, and it's an awkward friggin' instrument.
Yeah, it's not very sexy.
No, and they don't know, and you've got to pay attention to your playing. But who are you hearing, young guys now, that might be the future here? Besides,
well, one of my favorite guys, and he's kind of become a pet project with me, is Eddie Dunlap.
Right.
I think Eddie is steel guitar star material. He's brilliant mind, great set of chops, and he knows more about steel guitar history than I think just about anybody.
Right.
I think Justin Shipper is doing really good stuff. He's been a very successful session player.
He's very successful right now.
And there's a handful. There's a lot of people I don't know about. I mean, I'm kind of here in insulated Nashville, so I don't even know a whole lot.
No, there's guys out there. You'll get stuff.
Yeah.
The co-founder of Steel Guitar Arts Council, Whit,
Whit
is coming up with
Whit,
new ideas.
We're working on a record together. We got Dakota here. Dakota Holden, right? Dakota is the only name you need.
Yeah, I guess
we're actually talking about, we're going to go in a few weeks and do some recording with him. Whit and I are going to produce it. So we're trying to move it forward. We're trying to make steel guitar records for non-steel fans.
It's just, it's once again, it's going to be about the instrumentalist who comes and just happens to take that instrument and use it to express his ideas and put it in a record. I mean,
well, have a great song to begin with. I think you have to have the right song, and then have somebody come along and play it very honestly. I think people are interested in good, honest playing, good, honest music.
So what do you see in the future for the steel guitar?
I think it's Well, it seems to be, it's always been sort of flirting with pop music world. Every once in a while somebody comes along. Here to Nashville, they'll come and make a record, and they'll put steel guitar in it, and we all talk about it. And then, I think eventually there might be, I keep waiting for the Jimi Hendrix of the pedal steel. Somebody comes along that turns it upside down. It's probably going to be something that might even be slightly uncomfortable to listen to, because it's going to be, they're going to come out from nowhere with a new way, because it is a great tone generating device, but it has a lot of traditional baggage that goes with it. And somebody's going to come along with none of that baggage and completely turn it upside down.
Well, we're in a situation now that's unique, where everything is available to learn.
Yes.
If you want to sit down there and you want to learn how Paul Franklin played every one of those licks, you can do that.
Yep.
If you want to tune into Travis Toy and listen to another concept, because Travis, I mean, he's this guy, he's a pretty amazing musician. I mean, he's a musician beyond being a steel player. I mean, the guy sings a beautiful thing. Yeah. Sings like Vince Gill, which before we stop, I do want to talk a little bit about Vince.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, but players, young players now have all these resources where you and I had to find somebody down the street who might know a lick, or we had to slow a record down and we had to learn. Fortunately, we didn't have phones but you're right. This Hendrix guy that you're talking about, this Hendrix person you speak of that hadn't come out yet. He's going to be that person who sat down there and just stayed locked in that room and just worked and worked and worked.
Yeah.
What I miss now about young players, and this goes across the board, and I see it, they didn't have the opportunity that we had, where you could be a teenager and end up playing 5 nights a week in a club somewhere, 4 hours a night, 5 hours a night.
Yes, it's the farm team sort of thing. You could go play. Now it's hard to make a living learning how to play. Back then we could learn. We earned as we learned.
But just to we probably need to wrap this up here in a minute, but or not. But one thing that you had the opportunity to do, which I've never had the opportunity to do, to me it says something about your talent, and it just, you got to work with Vince Gill, who probably respects and loves steel guitar more than any artist in the history of this town.
Absolutely.
I met Vince when he moved here. I met Vince when he was in Pure Prairie League, but he was always the nicest guy. He couldn't get arrested for a while when he got here. And then when he finally got a record deal, the first couple people he hired were Hank DeVito, legendary Hank DeVito, Rusty Young, and J.D. Manis. And then he had John Huey for a really long time. And Paul Franklin. But you played with him for 5 years.
Played with him for 5 years. Probably from about 2005 to 2010, right in there.
Yeah.
Best steel guitar gig in the world. He's known for playing long sets, and the first hour would be country music with the best country singer in the world, and unashamedly country hillbilly steel guitar. Just the more hillbilly, the more he loved it. And I was really lucky. I went out to fill in one weekend and just kind of stayed there for 5 years.
Yeah.
And Vince was great. I mean, always the best band. And like I say, the last hour, we'd play 2-hour set. First hour would be all country. The second, we'd get into rock and roll. I just picked up a guitar and practiced rhythm guitar because he already had 3 other guitar players.
Right.
But that first hour was heavy-duty country steel guitar, and he's not going to sit and wait. Same thing with Elton John. It's like they're not sitting and waiting for you. When they start playing, show is on, and you better be there completely. And I don't. Somehow I managed to pull it. I fooled him for 5 years. So.
And then our young friend Eddie Dunlop.
Eddie
played
just
with
did,
him the other day and killed it.
Yep. Yeah. Eddie just did 4 nights at the Ryman, and they were doing like 4-hour shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and Paul has been doing it ever since I did it. So, and Tommy White would be in there from time to time.
Tommy played too. Another legendary player
Yes,
that I hope you guys get to interview him on the council here. What about you, man? What's your life? So we were talking about this earlier. You know, the stages of being, your career stages of being a professional musician. And you know, you and I are lucky enough that we've had good careers. I mean, for 40-something years in Nashville,
we've made livings.
We've made a living. We've raised kids. We've had families. We've done this thing. We're still, thank God, relatively healthy. But we're all, and then we're with our good buddy, some of our good buddies that had careers earlier. You know, Billy and Lloyd and everything they're all in their 80s.
Yeah.
What's the future for you now, man? I mean, you still get calls. You're still getting calls.
I still, I kind of work enough. I don't do a lot of the grinding demo work. Well, a lot of the demo work isn't there anymore. Yeah. But also, a lot of times people call, and if it's something I don't want to do, I get my young friends to do it because they need the work. I'm just playing. I still practice. I'm rebuilding a guitar an old Emmons right now. That's as much fun as anything for me to spend a day in the workshop. It's like working under a car. You just get in there and you get your hands greasy and wind pickups, and I still practice. I get up. There's always a guitar next to the bed. First thing I do when I get up in the morning is I sit there and play blues guitar for 15 minutes. It's just, I love music.
Yeah, and it keeps, hopefully it's going to keep us.
Yeah, till I
fall something.
Over. Yeah.
You know?
Well, I had a long talk with Eddie Dunlap on the phone the other night. I said, I'm still on fire. I can't let it go.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm excited about it. Some days I'm over it. Some days I just go, fuck this. I don't want to do this anymore. But overall, I want to do it, and I want to do it better. Every day I want to be better.
I just discovered, I mean, I've heard about it for years, but it's finally hit me about this silly thing. And I think I kind of learned it from Travis Toy or something, because he talked about it, but tritone substitutions. Which is really a technical way of stuff that some of this stuff I was doing naturally for my whole life, but it was just, for me, it was just fascinating. So now I'm like going, maybe I'm going to start learning a little bit of music theory here.
You never too. It's just, as long as you are learning and moving forward, you're not aging as fast. We're all getting older. You can't deny that. But the people I know that are curious and inquisitive and want to learn, I think, lead healthier lives.
Well, what recommendation would you give to a young person who wants to start out as a musician?
Follow that sound that's in your soul. Follow that. You're hearing a sound. Do whatever it takes to try to actualize that sound, that feel. Just don't get caught up in gear. Don't get caught up in music theory. Just try to express what's within yourself. And that to me is that's the crux to the whole thing.
Any regrets on lifestyle for you that you tell young people to?
No,
avoid?
I wish I would have hung around with Pete Drake. I was in town for a few years when he was still alive, and I didn't have the wherewithal to go become his friend, because I hear he was a really cool guy.
I got to hang with him.
That's probably And then there's a Gretsch guitar I sold back in '72 that I
Oh,
shouldn't have
yeah.
sold.
Well, I've got a '62 Strat. I traded for a pound of weed. Back,
So yeah,
you know.
So those are my only two regrets.
Yeah. Well, good. That's a pretty good life, well lived.
Yeah. Well, do what we can.
I mean, it's wonderful to be. Thank you for letting me come in here and interview. Maybe we'll have some more interviews. We'll figure out. Maybe one day we should maybe think about getting a couple guys and just getting a esoteric roundtable to help these young players. But
well, it's nice to pass on information. It's really nice to talk to you. I've interviewed you. You've done your homework. You haven't asked me any dumb questions, so I'm very happy.
What's your sign?
I'm not going to tell you that.
Okay. Well,
Pluto.
Well, thanks for letting me be involved in this great endeavor, and you know, tell your friends, anybody out there listening, to start spreading the word about the Steel Guitar Arts Council, and got a great crew here. We're at Whitwright's home, and and we got young Dakota here helping with the camera angle. So if you have complaints, I guess, do you have a complaint line?
Which is the guy in the plaid shirt back there.
Well, cool.
Whoop him.
All right. Peace out.
All right.